Before we go, a news story that I think should have gotten a lot more attention than it did. It was in the New York Times Deal Book section, and the headline was, "A Whistleblower Tells of Health Insurers Bilking Medicare." This whistleblower's name is Benjamin Poling of Bloomington, Minnesota. And Bloomington, Minnesota, if you know the healthcare field, means only one thing in the health insurance world: United Health. He works for United Health. Mr. Poling described in detail, according to the report, how his company and others like it, in his opinion, that's the New York Times qualifier, gamed the Medicare system. He was a finance director, and they monitored projects that United Health had designed to make patients look sicker than they were by scouring the patient's health records electronically and finding ways to, in the words of New York Times reporter Mary Williams Walsh, goose the diagnosis codes. Now, you might not have any reason to know this, but I used to work in the healthcare field for a long time, and I know a lot about this. It's a real thing, and it infects every layer of our healthcare system. Let me tell you a little bit more. First of all, let's talk a little bit more about what Benjamin Poling had to say. He said in an interview, they've set up a perfect scheme here. It was rigged so that there was no way they can lose. What happens in this particular case is that health plans like United Health set up a Medicare Advantage program, a Medicare wraparound program, that then they get reimbursed based on the health status of their enrollees. Now, that's the intent was to make sure that nobody got stuck for a highly expensive Medicare patient, that they got a reasonable reimbursement. Now, I would argue that there's no point even having a Medicare Advantage program, that money, which is a 15% layer on to the private sector, it hasn't really proved to be cost effective to give that extra money to the private sector. We're not sure we're getting concrete results out of it. Maybe that money should just go to all Medicare beneficiaries. But that aside, okay, that's the way the system's supposed to work. So he's basically saying algorithms and other ways to say that, let's say, for example, if I'm a Medicare patient, I'm not, but let's say I were, and I was in one of these programs, that they might find a minor complaint I'd had years ago, find it in my record, say I'm a guy who has this chronic condition, and get way more for me to provide me with insurance than they should. This is, I always call it the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote system of reimbursement that we have in this country. People are always trying to create the new ACME billing extender system, and then someone else has to come along and get around it and outrace it. That's what we're up against in the healthcare system now. It used to happen that companies like United Health had to change hospitals that were doing the same thing, because companies like United Health followed the lead of Medicare in the United States government by reimbursing patients for an inpatient stay based on what their condition was. So if I went into the hospital with appendicitis, they'd get X amount of dollars for treating me. Now, what the hospitals started doing was exactly the same thing that this guy says the health insurers do now. They'd scour my medical record. They'd say, are you sure you don't have something else, maybe asthma? And you might say, well, I had asthma when I was a kid. Then all of a sudden it's appendicitis with complicating conditions, and they get 3 times as much money. That's how our entire healthcare system works nowadays. It works on people inventing the ACME cost booster program, because that's how people make money. And it's gotten even worse over the last couple decades, because investors have got in. They've bought hospital corporations. They bought private practice management corporations. So even physicians are getting into the game. Pharmacy executives, pharmacy chain executives, for example, for Duane Reade pharmacies in New York, have been indicted for Medicare fraud. CVS, other places have dealt with Medicare fraud. Our entire system is based on inflating the cost so that somebody can make a buck. And if you can't find a legal way to inflate the cost, commit fraud. This is not just an unfortunate aspect of our healthcare system. It is an integral part of our healthcare system, because our healthcare system is based on a for-profit system. It can be tracked back to Wall Street and investors. It can be tracked back to people like Mitt Romney and Bain Capital. It is a fundamentally broken system, and we won't be able to afford healthcare in this country until we go after that system aggressively. Now, what's the best way to address that system? Well, number one, Medicare for all. Get the health insurance companies out of the equation. Number two, use the purchasing power of the United States government as the nation's insurer to set fair, reasonable compensation rates for all sorts of health treatment. And if you try to make a buck off that, use the computing power of the database of Medicare to catch fraudsters and put them in jail. There's no better way to do it. Get the for-profit motive out of the healthcare system. Get a single-payer health insurance system that works, and put the bad guys in jail.